They all saw it coming. While everyone else trusted the system, they quietly moved their wealth somewhere safer. While neighbors insisted everything was fine, they prepared for what history had already proven was inevitable. And when collapse finally arrived, when currencies crumbled, when banks closed their doors, when governments broke their promises, these people didn't just survive. They thrived because they knew something most people refused to accept. The system is designed to fail, and only those who act before the failure can protect what's theirs. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is pattern recognition. And the pattern is so consistent, so brutally predictable, that once you see it, you can't unsee it. The wealth secret of collapse survivors isn't about luck or insider knowledge. It's about understanding one simple truth that cuts across every catastrophe in human history. When everything falls apart, value doesn't disappear. It just moves. And it always moves from those who waited to those who acted first. Let me show you what the survivors knew that everyone else missed. Start with Rome. Not the fall. We'll get there, but the crisis of the 3rd century. For decades, Roman emperors faced wars on every border, rebellions inside, and treasury problems they couldn't solve through taxation alone. So they did what desperate governments always do. They debased the currency. The silver denarius, once nearly pure, was diluted again and again until it was barely 10% silver. Merchants stopped accepting it. Soldiers refused payment. The economy convulsed. Prices exploded, and ordinary Romans watched their savings become worthless. But here's what matters. Not everyone was ruined. Some Romans saw the debasement happening and converted their denarii into land, into gold jewelry, into grain stores, anything tangible. When the currency collapsed, these people still had wealth. They had shifted from paper promises to physical reality before the illusion broke. You'd think the lesson would stick. You'd think future empires would look at Rome's debasement disaster and say, never again. But they didn't, because the temptation is too strong. When governments need money and can't raise it honestly, they print it, they debase it, they inflate it away. And every single time, the people who see it coming get out first, while the faithful majority loses everything. The survivors of Rome's monetary collapse understood something profound. Government money is only valuable until the government needs it not to be. And when that moment comes, your wealth isn't determined by how much currency you hold, but by whether you've already converted it into something real. That's the first part of the secret. But it's not enough to just hold assets. You have to hold the right assets. And history is filled with people who thought they were safe, only to discover they'd bet on the wrong kind of protection. Jump forward to Spain in the 16th century. The conquistadors returned from the Americas with ships full of gold and silver, more precious metal than Europe had seen in centuries. Spain became the wealthiest nation on earth practically overnight. The Spanish crown had unlimited wealth, or so it seemed. But here's the cruel irony. All that gold destroyed Spain. Because they didn't produce anything. They just had metal. They imported food, manufactured goods, military supplies, everything, and paid for it with American treasure. Meanwhile, their neighbors took Spanish gold and built industries, farms, and infrastructure. Spain inflated its own economy into ruin. Precious metals flooded in, but real productive capacity stayed flat or declined. By the time the treasure ships stopped coming, Spain was hollow. Wealthy on paper, but economically crippled in reality. The lesson isn't that gold is worthless. It's that even gold can become a trap if it disconnects you from productive reality. The survivors of Spain's collapse weren't the ones hoarding the most gold. They were the Dutch merchants building trade networks, the English farmers improving agricultural yields, the French manufacturers producing goods people actually needed. They understood that wealth isn't just what you store, it's what you can create, trade, and leverage when the world changes. This is where most people miss the deeper secret. They think survival is about having the right assets. But the real survivors knew something more. Assets without productivity are just a slower way to lose. When Spain's gold ran out, the hoarders were trapped. When productive economies kept growing, the builders got richer. So the secret expands. You need real assets, yes. But you also need them connected to something that produces value. Because when collapse comes, the question isn't just whether you have gold or land or food. It's whether what you have can still generate wealth after the system breaks. And sometimes, the collapse happens so fast that even productive assets can't save you. unless you've done one more crucial thing. Weimar Germany, 1923. The hyperinflation is famous now. The images of people carrying wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread, children playing with stacks of worthless marks. But what most people don't know is how fast it happened at the end. In the early months of 1923, prices were rising, but life was still somewhat manageable. By autumn, the currency was dying by the day. By November, it was dead. A teacher's monthly salary, which could have bought a house in 1922, couldn't buy a loaf of bread in late 1923. Savings accounts that represented decades of work were reduced to less than the cost of a postage stamp. Pensioners starved. Families burned cash for warmth because it was cheaper than buying firewood. But here's the part that reveals the real secret. Some Germans came out of hyperinflation wealthier than they went in. Not because they were cruel or lucky, but because they understood the transfer before it happened. They borrowed heavily in marks when the currency still had some value, then bought real assets, buildings, factories, farmland. As hyperinflation destroyed the mark, their debts became worthless while their assets retained value. They paid off million-mark loans with pocket change, while savers who trusted the bank lost everything. This is where the survivor's secret becomes almost uncomfortable. Because the truth is that collapse isn't just about protection. It's about positioning. The people who survived Weimar best weren't just holding gold in a safe. They were using the dying system against itself, leveraging debt that would inflate away while acquiring assets that wouldn't. Now, before anyone misunderstands, I'm not advocating reckless borrowing or predatory behavior. I'm describing what happened. The lesson is that in every collapse, there is a mechanism of transfer. Wealth moves from those who hold depreciating assets to those who hold appreciating ones. From those in cash to those in tangibles. From savers to debtors when inflation runs wild. And from debtors to savers when deflation strikes. The survivors understood the direction of the transfer and positioned themselves accordingly. And that's exactly what played out again and again throughout the 20th century, in every country that watched its currency implode. Let's move faster now, because the pattern is so clear it becomes almost mechanical. Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Hyperinflation hit 300 million%. The people who survived held foreign currency, gold, or goods they could trade. Those who trusted the dinar lost everything. Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Inflation so extreme, they printed $100 trillion notes. Farmers with land and food stayed fed. Civil servants with salaries starved. Venezuela in the 2010s. Once the richest country in South America, now its people dig through garbage for food. The currency collapsed. Savings evaporated. The survivors were those who had dollars abroad, who had property outside the country, or who could produce something people desperately needed. Do you see it yet? The secret isn't complicated. In every collapse, the same transfer happens. From paper to tangible. From passive savings to active assets. From trust in the system to independence from it. The survivors of every currency collapse, every financial crisis, every government default, they all did the same thing. They stopped believing the promises and started holding the reality. But here's where it gets interesting. Because not all collapses are about currency. Some are about institutions. And when institutions collapse, there's a different kind of transfer, one that's just as predictable and just as brutal. Cyprus, 2013. It was a modern European country, part of the Eurozone, with banks that seemed as stable as any in the developed world. Until they weren't. The government, desperate to avoid a total collapse, did something shocking. They seized deposits directly from bank accounts. Not just the wealthy, ordinary people woke up to find a chunk of their savings simply taken. The banks called it a haircut. The people called it theft. But the lesson wasn't new. It was just forgotten. Because the same thing had happened in Argentina in 2001, when the government froze bank accounts and forcibly converted dollar deposits into devalued pesos. People stood outside banks, locked out of their own money, watching their life savings cut in half overnight. And it happened again in Greece during their debt crisis, when capital controls trapped money inside the country and ATMs were rationed to 60 euros per day. And it happened in Lebanon in 2019, when banks simply stopped giving people their deposits, an informal freeze that destroyed the middle class, while the wealthy had already moved their money abroad. The pattern is unmistakable. When a financial system is in crisis, the institution will always protect itself first. Your deposits are not sitting in a vault with your name on them. They are loans you've made to the bank, and the bank has lent them out, invested them, leveraged them. When the system breaks, those loans become the bank's lifeline, not yours. And governments will side with the institution, not with you. So what did the survivors do? They didn't wait for the freeze. In Cyprus, the people who survived best had already moved money to other countries. In Argentina, they held dollars in cash, not in banks. In Greece, they transferred savings before capital controls locked the borders. In Lebanon, they saw the signs: collapsing currency, rising debt, political instability, and they acted before everyone else panicked. This is the secret in its rawest form. Institutions fail, and they will sacrifice you to survive. The people who come out whole are never the ones who trusted most. They're the ones who doubted first and acted while everyone else was still asleep. So let's bring it all together. What is the secret that collapse survivors know? It's not one thing. It's a playbook. And every survivor, in every collapse, follows some version of these same rules. Rule 1. Don't trust paper promises. Whether it's currency, bank deposits, or government bonds, when the crisis hits, paper burns first. Convert some of your wealth into physical assets that can't be printed, inflated, or seized as easily. Rule 2. Diversify your risk across jurisdictions. If all your wealth is in one country, one bank, one currency, you are completely exposed. Survivors spread their assets across borders, across systems, across entities that can't all fail at once. Rule 3. Hold assets that produce value, not just store it. Gold is better than cash in a collapse, but farmland that produces food is better than gold that just sits in a vault. Businesses that generate income, tools that enable work, skills that create value. These are the assets that don't just survive collapse, they thrive in it. Rule 4. Understand the direction of the transfer. In hyperinflation, debt becomes cheap and tangible assets soar. In deflation, cash is king and debtors drown. In institutional collapse, anything outside the institution is safer than anything inside it. Read the signs, see where value is flowing, and position yourself on the receiving end. Rule 5. Act before the crowd panics. The survivors didn't wait until the banks froze accounts or the currency died. They moved early, while it was still easy, while others were still saying, "It can't happen here." By the time everyone knows the system is failing, it's too late to get out. This is the playbook. And if you look at every collapse in history, you'll see the survivors following some version of these rules. The ones who lost everything were the ones who trusted the promises, who waited too long, who believed their country or their bank or their currency was different. But there's one more piece to this. One final part of the secret that separates those who merely survive from those who emerge from collapse wealthier than before. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every collapse is a redistribution. Wealth doesn't disappear, it moves. From the unprepared to the prepared. From the paralyzed to the opportunistic. And while the majority suffers, a minority seizes assets at a fraction of their value and builds fortunes that last generations. After the 2008 financial crisis, millions of Americans lost their homes to foreclosure. But someone bought those homes. Investment firms like BlackRock scooped up entire neighborhoods at pennies on the dollar. A decade later, those properties are worth multiples of what they paid. After the Asian financial crisis in 1997, Western investors bought companies, real estate, and infrastructure for fire sale prices. The local populations were devastated, but the people with dollars made generational wealth. After hyperinflation in Germany, industrialists and foreign investors bought factories and land from families who were desperate to eat. Those assets became empires. This isn't about morality. It's about mechanism. In every collapse, assets are sold under duress. Someone is buying. And the buyers are the survivors who prepared, who held liquidity when everyone else was illiquid, who stayed calm when everyone else panicked. The deepest part of the secret is this. Collapse isn't just something to survive. For those who see it coming, it's the single greatest wealth transfer opportunity they'll ever encounter. And that's why the survivors don't just hold gold or property as a hedge. They hold liquidity, cash, stable foreign currency, assets they can quickly convert. Because when the collapse comes, they're not just defending what they have. They're ready to acquire what others are forced to give up. So here we are. You've seen the pattern. You know what survivors do differently. You understand the playbook, the transfers, the opportunities. Now there's only one question left. Which side of the collapse will you be on? Because here's the thing. Collapse is not some distant historical curiosity. It's happening right now, in slow motion, across the developed world. Currencies are being inflated, debts are ballooning to levels that can never be repaid, banks are fragile, governments are printing money faster than economies can grow. The signs are all there, written in the same language that warned of every collapse before. Most people will ignore this. They'll say it's different this time, or the government won't let it happen, or my country is too stable. They'll keep their savings in the bank, their wealth in one currency, their faith in institutions that have failed 1,000 times before. And when the collapse comes, not if, but when, they'll be the ones holding worthless paper while their purchasing power evaporates. But you don't have to be one of them. You've seen what the survivors do. You know the secret now. The only question is whether you'll act on it before the door slams shut. Because history is very clear, the time to prepare for collapse is not when everyone sees it coming. It's when they're still saying it's impossible. The survivors weren't smarter or luckier. They just moved first. So move. Diversify. Build. Convert promises into reality. Position yourself for the transfer. And when the system finally breaks, you won't be one of the many left holding nothing. You'll be one of the few who saw it coming and did what needed to be done. The secret is out. The only question now is what you do with it. If this changed how you see the system, hit subscribe. History keeps repeating. I'll keep showing you the patterns.